From the Alvin and Rosalie Sarachek studio, PBS Kansas presents Kansas Week.
The city of Wichita preparing to crack down on homeless encampments as citizens lodge more complaints. But first, a new ranking of Wichita area school districts puts USD 259 right near the bottom. Is a new facilities master plan with a $450 million bond issue any kind of solution? That's what we're talking about right now on Kansas Week. Hello and welcome to Kansas Week. I'm Jared Cerullo. A new survey this week gives less than stellar marks to the state's largest school district. Of 18 Wichita area schools included in the report compiled by niche.com, the top 5 are Andover, Renwick, Mays, Valley Center, and Goddard. The Wichita district ranked 15th. The criteria included parent and student surveys, academic outcomes, classroom diversity, culture, and other metrics. This comes as Wichita school officials begin their campaign for a $450 million bond issue. That will go before voters on February 25th. The money would fund the district's new master's facility plan, which includes closing some schools and building new ones. School officials say the bond issue would not raise the current property tax rate, but it would extend the current bond tax an additional 20 years. Here to offer some perspective on this issue, we have former state school board member Dr. Walt Chappell, who is owner and president of Educational Management Consultants based in Wichita. Also, we have Wichita Eagle opinion editor Dion Leffler, Democrat State Representative John Carmichael, and KNSS political talk show host John Whitmer. Welcome to all of you, and thanks for joining us this week. Walt, I'm going to start with you. As a former state school board member, you are definitely opposed to this. Tell me a few of the reasons why.
Well, quite frankly, we've seen this movie before. Back in 2000 and 2008, we had similar arguments made. Well, we're going to build a bunch of new buildings and student achievement's going to go up. In fact, it didn't, but in the meantime, we spent $430 million in the last bond issue to pay contractors and architects, engineers. A lot of those folks made a good profit, but nothing happened to actually improve things for our students.
And you mentioned some of the things that you told us. The district never had a $42 million deficit and does not have $1.2 billion in deferred maintenance. How can you make that claim?
Oh, that's great. Thanks for bringing that up. The way they've been doing this sales job is to actually fabricate information. That's a nice polite way of saying it's not true. What they put together for the board and presented in public meetings was a calculation that showed only the state revenue and the local property tax revenue, and left out the $80 million a year we receive in federal funds. Our school district spends right now approximately $1 billion a year. But when they showed the calculations, they said, oh, we're going to be short $42 million. At the start of this fiscal year, it was $236 million, and they were showing that by July of this year, we'd have 118 left. So what happened? That by January of this year, we're now short $42 million. It's bogus. It's a number made up that was there to scare the district school board and then justify closing 6 schools.
Also, you just mentioned they closed six schools. The district closed 6 schools earlier this year, and now there's a proposal to close even more schools.
18 more. They started calling it consolidate. But I say that's another C word for close, right? So they finally changed it on their slides that they put up on PowerPoint. Yes, they're going to close another 18, and eventually this will be about $2.2 billion that they want the local taxpayers to pay out of property taxes over the next 10 to 15 years.
I'll move over to Dion, Wichita Eagle opinion editor. Do you agree? Do you have any rebuttal to that argument?
Well, if you looked at the list of schools that are ranked at the top, they all have one thing in common. They all have had very recent bond issues to build very new schools And, well, they have other things in common too. They have a wealthier property tax base. They have more motivated parental involvement. The challenges in USD 259 are many and varied. Just the language barriers alone, with the number of kids they have who are refugees and immigrants and other cultures. They deserve schools that are as good as Andover and Goddard. I am sorry. I don't think that, as a child, I went to schools that were underfunded and just nasty.
But how can we continue to justify continuing to spend so much more money when over the past bond issue that was started in 2008, the school district promised us that test scores would rise, and test scores haven't risen?
Well, because educating these children is challenging, and there are a lot of kids going to some really old schools in this district. It's just, yeah, we can go cheap on it, sure. We can starve, we can starve the minority students who go to Wichita schools, and if you're poor, don't move to Andover, but that's, education needs to be funded, and it needs to be equitably funded. And this whole property tax thing is pretty ridiculous anyway, because where I came from, when a developer brought hundreds of new homes in, they had to provide a school. They had to provide a school, or they had to provide they had to pay an impact fund to build the schools to take in the children that they were bringing to the district. And here, it's all on the backs of the taxpayers, and it's a lousy system.
John Whitmer, I'll move over to you. Do you disagree? I assume you disagree on that.
I'm actually thrilled to hear that Dion Leffler is a fan of school choice and allowing those low-income students to move to other districts and take the taxpayer money with them so that they could attend more affluent districts. I think it's a great idea. Look, here's where this bottom line comes down to.
Of course, it's not exactly what I said, but
John, school choice
John
is
has
the solution.
his little,
but here's the bottom line.
School choice is the solution to nothing.
My objection to this whole thing started with something you said at the very beginning. The district, and right now they're spending $316,000 in taxpayer money to lobby the taxpayers for more taxpayer money, but let's set that aside. Here's my objection to this. Right now, in 2028, the current bond expires. So right now, if you vote no, you're voting to give yourself a tax cut. They are, the school district, the folks behind this initiative, are selling you a bum deal because they're advocating and selling this as not a tax increase. And that is blatantly untrue, because your taxes, your property taxes, will go down by $179 a year on a $200,000 house. Your property taxes will get cut in 2028 if you vote no. By definition, it's a 30-year tax increase if this passes. So I just want them to be honest. If you need the money, then make the case. But don't go around telling people it's not a tax increase, because it is a tax increase. So be honest. Make the case. We need the money. We don't need the money. But don't tell people it's not a tax increase, because in 3 years, it will be a tax increase. And right now, people are suffering, and they can't afford yet another tax increase.
John, I think you were in the legislature, weren't you, when Sam Brownback extended the sales tax increase?
Absolutely, and it was the worst thing we could have done.
And,
because we didn't cut spending, which is exactly what
you guys
USD
didn't call that a
259.
tax increase.
Actually, we did. And it was the worst thing we could have done. And it was the worst thing we could have done.
I was there,
mean,
John.
ask anybody right now. They will tell you Tax increases are what's killing this economy. It's what's forcing people who are living on a fixed income, people who are low income, they are being forced out of their homes because of property taxes. And you want someone now to come around and go for another 30 years on another tax increase? It's
John,
obscene.
In Wallace, Idaho, I went to a school that had been condemned for 6 years.
Yes, but back then, Diane,
And
people were riding to school in their horse and buggy. Nowadays, in
I went to a
Biden
school that had
economy
been
and Harris
condemned for
economy,
6 years.
folks cannot afford it.
It was called the new school. The old school had been condemned for 25 years, and it was still in use.
I'm not
Because
saying
of
that they
people-
don't need
because
this.
of attitudes like yours.
But Dion, the superintendent has told the school board they can do this without a tax increase. He just doesn't want to do this without a tax increase. I say let them make the case that they have yet to prove that they absolutely have to have a tax increase. Let's show some cuts. Let's prove that you could do this without raising taxes, and
Sure.
they haven't done it.
Oh, you could do it. I mean,
Okay, well, if you
just
can do it, then do it.
But then, we're talking about, how bad it is to be closing buildings.
Well-
Okay, well, close more.
No.
That's the only way to get.
Find a
that's
way
the
without
only way to
raising
get that money.
taxes.
All right, I'm
Find
going
a
to
way.
step in here and give John Carmichael just a couple of minutes to respond as well. John, what do you think about this? Are they bringing up good points, or is this? Tell me
By
your
they,
thoughts
I
here.
assume you mean my colleagues
Yes.
here on your panel today, and I agreed with much of what I heard until my friend John started getting a little bit loud, but we'll leave that where it is.
Loud?
In my legislative district, we have 4, 5, 6 schools that are being closed in that attendance area in the 92nd district. I think the school board has a hard road ahead of them to sell this bond issue to the voters. The superintendent was out visiting at in fact, my personal neighborhood association just down the street the other day. I don't think he changed many minds in that room. Partly because of what Walt has to say. Walt was there, he saw it happen. The superintendent and I are going to get together and have a visit about his ideas. They've got until February to make their case. They've got until February to respond to John's arguments. But if they don't get out and sell this bond issue, it's going to be dead on arrival.
Yeah.
And if it is, then they have a backup plan. The superintendent tells me they have this plan, and I'm anxious to hear from him what it is, because maybe it will solve more than one of the concerns we've heard here today. Final comment, though, Jared, is we have an urban school district, not a suburban school district. And it is expensive to educate kids in this district, and it is expensive to build the facilities. So I'm not terribly surprised that a group would come out and say suburban schools perform better than the central urban city school. That is not at all unusual, and no, John, school choice is not a cure for that.
One last thing, I'm going to move back to Walt. He mentioned, Representative Carmichael mentioned that the bond issue election was chosen to be held in February. Do you think that was a tactical decision by
Very
the school
much so.
district?
It's a
And
choice.
why? Tell me why.
We asked for them to put it on November's ballot for this November, when you get like 65% turnout. If you hold it in February, that's going to cost the taxpayers an additional amount to hold that election of about 130,000. But my point is that only about 8 or 10% will show up. So they have to show just a small number of people to come to vote and say, oh, yes, we need more schools. We're going to close these. We're going to give you money to spend $450 million more. That's not going to improve student achievement. I want to close with one other idea. I went back and checked the data on the new schools they built from 2008. The idea was we're going to have student achievement go up if you give us a brand new school like Renwick or like the folks over at Andover you mentioned, Mays. Okay, we have Mueller Elementary School with only 6% of the students. It's a brand new school, 6% of the students proficient. 6. In the case of Ortiz, that school was on North Arkansas Avenue, It's now called Ortiz. Only 12% of the students are proficient. District-wide, only 15% are proficient in math. And science scores actually went down this last year. So we've had a 35% increase in revenue, talking about funding, since 2017. We've had approximately from $14,000 per student to $20,000 per student. We're spending the money, we're not getting the results.
Yeah.
And closing schools and building new ones isn't the answer. That's the bottom line for me anyway.
We'll have to leave it at that. It will be certainly a decision in February that a lot of people hopefully will turn out for. Moving on, though, the U.S. Supreme Court has given local governments more latitude in how they deal with encampments on public property. The city manager's office is drafting 2 new ordinances in response to this growing problem that is testing the patience of more and more citizens. Cake's Nick Nelson has the details and some reaction.
It's my understanding that the laws are changing based on the Supreme Court decision. At the direction of the council, we are preparing 2 ordinances that will recognize the changes, will be more aggressive in terms of encampments on public property as well as use of sidewalks.
The city of Wichita is set to follow suit with the U.S. Supreme Court and work on imposing new rules to reduce the number of homeless encampments on public property in the city. Residents voiced their frustration at the September 17th City Council meeting, saying the city isn't doing enough.
This is a homeless issue, and I don't think the city's doing enough to clear the homeless camps from the riverfront. When I've spoken to the homeless outreach team, I've been told they lack the resources to adequately patrol the river.
Members of the homeless community often set up camps like this one in South Wichita. They'll stay in one place until police tell them to move on within 72 hours. Many times the tents reappear in other parts of the city. This comes as Wichita is set to open a new homeless multi-agency center in the former Park Elementary building in the next few months. David Hodge with the Union Rescue Mission says the city has been working with his organization and others to address the homelessness issue that he says is growing.
We've had the opportunity with a number of providers to provide ideas and input as to what types of services the city might offer that would be important to offer to the residents in the MAC. The mayor and city council have convened a number of meetings asking the community's providers to speak into the process. Those meetings still continue. So we're providing some input.
Hodge says while he thinks the possible new ordinances are a good idea, he'd like to see the city be compassionate toward the volatile community and provide them with other opportunities.
If someone's homeless, there's no law against that. That's somebody we want to show compassion and help relaunch. But you also can't camp on public property or private property illegally. So I know that the city's considering how they want to approach that. So we want to bring a solution as we provide the rescue and the emergency overnight shelter.
John Whitmer, I'll start with you. The argument that some are making in the community, at least that I've heard, is that the city is acting too soon and that we should wait until the multi-agency center is built before we start sweeping these encampments out. Should we or should we?
I think you have to be compassionate. You want to provide a resource, but at the same time, having been a small business, my wife and I are small business owners. We've had a retail location. We fortunately didn't have, because we weren't in the core, but I've spoken to small business owners. If you go down, we go to Pachyderm Club for lunch. We go to the Sedgwick County Republican Party meeting every month, and it's right downtown. You see it all the time. Anytime you go downtown, you see it. You have to respect these small businesses that are trying to, maintain their business, and so you've got the issue. So, frankly, no, I don't think they need to wait. I think, as was mentioned in the feature there, the businesses, the property owners have a right to be able to do business without this interference.
But what about the respect of the people who have no other place to go?
There are other places to go other than in someone's private property. So there's a private property rights, and I'm always going to defer on the rights and default to the rights of property owners.
Understood.
You don't have a right to camp. Pardon me?
Where, John?
Where what?
Where is that place for them to go?
Well, not on my property.
Where's that place for them to go? There's no place for them to go.
Then with Dion, they can stay at your house if that's, but not
But
on my property.
the homelessness issue.
It's not funny.
People and real people's lives. Let's not laugh at people
It's not
in
a
this
funny
circumstance.
issue, but at the same time, John, they don't have a right to camp on someone else's land.
I did not say that they
So
did.
then you have to clean them out of there.
Jared.
Then the city can find a place or find a resource.
Jared, we have an example of the inefficaciousness, that's the wrong word, Dion.
Wow, that's a $5
of just,
word.
quote, clearing people out.
Yeah.
That's exactly what we did at Nafsker Park. We, quote, cleared people out, and those people just moved north along Broadway Street.
Topeka Street.
So what's
yeah.
your solution then, John?
Into my legislative district, and it is having a real impact.
So what's your solution?
But what I'm trying to say, John, if you will let me speak, is that passing laws and ordinances that allow the police department to arrest somebody and put them in jail, well, that will put a roof over their head. But you have to look at solutions far beyond policing. And the center that they're building at Park Elementary School, one of the schools that's been closed,
was closed, that's
in
right.
my district, adjacent to my district, I don't know that that's going to be a panacea either, but it's a lot better way to try to address a chronic long-term policy than just assuming that a law passed by the city council one Tuesday is going to make a significant change.
Diane, I want to go to you real quick here. A lot of people also say that it's just cheaper to build housing for these people, for homeless people, rather than to continue to pay for the consequences of having them live on the street. Is that what we're doing with the multi-agency sitter?
Well, it's more complicated than that. Housing first, yes, is probably a good idea. Getting those people into housing can get them into a place where they can start to solve some of their other problems. But John's absolutely right about Nafsker Park. I don't go downtown just for Pachyderm Club and Republican Party meetings. I'm there every day. And I've been there every day for the last 26 years. And we went from having a, sort of an uneasy but workable situation where the homeless people kind of hung out in Nafsker Park, and then we, turned that into the plastic paradise it is now. And they did. They got pushed up the street. And, the Old Town Cinema Square, where my office used to be, was just, was basically overrun. The fundamental problem here is that we don't have the resources for them to, for those who can to get their lives back together, and those who can't to, to be able to exist.
But
and
will we
pushing
ever
them
have
around,
the resources? This isn't a new problem.
well, we have the resources to push them around town all the time. Maybe we could use some of those resources to try to solve these problems, because we spend an awful lot of time with police going out there, telling them you can't be here. Okay, then they move to another place. Now you can't be there either. Okay, now you move to another place. It's just this endless cycle of ridiculously.
But what's the solution then? Do we use taxpayer money to build them homes? Do we then?
Walt Chappell, I'm going to give you the last
what's the
30
solution?
seconds on this.
Well, housing first. We've had that recommendation for years. I don't know if you remember, Carl Brewer had a commission, and they came up. My point is that we have these vacant schools that we've supposedly closed, but they didn't. 15 of them. We have strip malls that are supposedly closed, that are sitting there, decaying, but could be used for housing. We don't need to go out and start building. That'll take 10 or 15 years to actually have enough housing. Let's make sure we use facilities we already have. Let people stay in those facilities, renovate them to a certain extent, use some of those monies we're talking about to chase people around, but treat them with dignity.
Understood.
These are human beings, our brothers and sisters. There, but for the grace of God, go you or I. Thank you.
I'll have to leave it at that. Our last story, though, new technology such as a land electric or AI and electric vehicles create more and more demand for electricity. And that's creating more demand for wind and solar farms across Kansas and more electric transmission lines. The federal government proposing a 5-mile wide path through the state of Kansas to transport electricity across the state. That has landowners along the proposed corridor concerned, as KSN's Peyton Steiner reports.
3 county commissions, Barton, Russell, and Pawnee, all gathered here at Barton Community College to discuss what to do next about this corridor. One of the county commissioners I spoke to said this is only the second joint commission he's seen in over 7 years in office.
We're going to have to show up for our state legislature. We're going to have to show up for our federal legislature.
Over 100 people gathered at Barton Community College. Their goal is to answer a few concerns, like federal eminent domain and how the corridor relates to the Grain-Belt Express, an already approved private energy line in the works for over a decade.
The reason that we planned the meeting is all of the smaller meetings in each of the jurisdictions left a lot of unanswered questions, and so we wanted to meet with our citizens and get those questions answered.
The Kansas Corporate Commission was in attendance answering questions from people. They say the federal eminent domain only comes into play if the state of Kansas rejects the DOE's proposals.
Oh, my main goal was just to answer questions from the crowd and try to provide accurate information as best as we could about the NETC process and about the Grain-Belt Express project.
The proposed corridor runs along the Grain-Belt Express. Invenergy, the company who owns that project, has asked the DOE to decrease the width from the original 5 miles to a half mile. The meeting ended with a vote by all 3 counties to send this letter of rejection to the Department of Energy. The DOE's next step is Phase 3, which is public comment. As of now, nothing is official. Here for you in Barton County, Peyton Steiner, KSN News 3.
And Walt Chappell, you've been a proponent of this. You like the idea. You're for this transmission line.
Absolutely. It's been in the works for over a decade. It's 370 miles in Kansas, and it will take electricity from our wind farms and solar farms to markets in Kansas City, St. Louis, Chicago. My point is that we need to go ahead and narrow that right away to half a mile instead of 5 miles. That makes a lot of sense.
Dion, any word?
Well, basically the federal government's going to do what the federal government wants to do, but if we want to have wind energy and we want that to be an industry and farmers make a lot of money from it, then you got to have the corridor to get the energy out of here.
John Whitmer?
I'm a property rights guy. Eminent domain is governmental theft. So I would say, the landowner should have the ultimate say. So
John
no, I
Carmichael?
oppose.
Maybe we'll have another show because this is a deep and important topic, and quite honestly, we don't have time to explore it at this point in the show. I agree with most of what all 3 of my colleagues have said.
All right. And that's the last word for this week because we are out of time. Thanks again to Walt Chappell, Dion Leffler, John Carmichael, and John Whitmer for being here. We also want to thank Cake and KSN for sharing their stories. And you can send your comments and questions to us at kansasweek@kpts.org. I'm Jared Cerullo. We'll see you next week.